The bitch is back!
Hello, wonderful people of the internet. I am back after quite a long break. I think it's been the best part of 2 months now, so I'm sorry that I haven't uploaded in that period. My phone that I had at the time, I've got a new one now, was getting really old, and if you believe in, the conspiracy theories, storage data had started to be uploaded onto it to the point where the phone wouldn't function, arguably because Apple was doing that and wanted me to buy another phone. Well, suck it, Apple, because now I have a Motorola.
Bruh.
So, hopefully this phone doesn't conk out too soon, so I can start uploading content regularly again. I'm aiming for once every Sunday. Now, it used to be Wednesdays and Sundays, but now that I'm progressing further through my school career, it means that uploading every Wednesday is going to be a bit more difficult, or at least consistently. And we like consistency here, so I'm going to be going for every Sunday, and maybe a Wednesday if I'm feeling a bit saucy. So, that's that. And what am I going to be talking about today? I'm going to be talking about Pet Sematary by Stephen King, so let's get into it. So, if you are one of the souls who has watched this channel for a while now, then you will know that I absolutely love Stephen King, and that 3 of my favourite books are written by him, and that would be Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, The Shining, and Misery. All of them are completely different, and all of them are equally great. Now, Pet Sematary is actually not in my list of top 10 favourite books like those ones are. However, it's still a very good book, and I look forward to talking about it with you all. So, what is Pet Sematary about? Let me just put it back while I do this, otherwise I'll be waving it around like a madman. So, the blurb on the back of this is not very good. So, I will do my best to describe the story better than the blurb does, although it will end up far worse, and we all know that. But I'll do my best anyway, and I can't really go into detail without giving spoilers. There will be a spoiler and non-spoiler section of this video. We're going to be starting with the non-spoiler, so here's the overview, and I'll elaborate on it in the spoiler section. So, Louis Creed and his family, which consists of his wife Rachel, his daughter Ellie, and his youngest child, the 2-year-old Gage, moved to a town called Ludlow, which I believe is in Maine, knowing Stephen King. They live opposite a really busy road where lorries tend to drive past at breakneck speed, and on the other side of this road are his 2 neighbours, Judd and Norma Crandall. So the story is about what happens when the Creeds move there, and about the pet cemetery that is behind the Creed's house, which is where the children of Ludlow have buried the animals that have been run over in this road. And this story is also about the place beyond the pet cemetery that far less people know about and is far more insidious. And I can't describe it any further than that, otherwise there'll be spoilers. So that's the bare bones summary. So what did I like about this book? Let's get Andrew Garfield and get into it. So, placed upon his throne. So, Stephen King, the good thing with all of Stephen King's books is his writing. So, Stephen King is pretty much the best, if not one of the best, writers that I've ever read. Now, I'm not exactly experienced in reading many writers. It's like I tend to stick to just a few, and my shelves might tell you otherwise, but I actually haven't read a lot of these. Cancel me on Twitter even though I don't have it, whatever you want to do. But, I can say that he's definitely one of the best I've ever read of the few that I have, and I know a lot of people agree with me who are far more well-read than I am, so take that as you will. And I think this is largely because of just the way he writes more than the stories. Now, the stories are great, and some of the most iconic stories, at least in the horror genre, that have ever been written, but I think what really brings Stephen King to the standard that he's regarded in today is the writing. So, his characters, his tone, his themes, and the way he will string a story together, it's all masterclass and really well done. But if I'm going to talk about the thing that really stands out in this book and the others that I've read, it's got to be the characters. His characters are the most fleshed out and the most compelling that I've ever read. They just leap off the page. I feel like I know them by the end of the stories, which makes it all yeah, and when all these bad things happen to them at the end of the horror ones, it hurts because it's like, no, I care about you. It's just astonishing. And with Stephen King, a lot of the horror isn't supernatural. It's not like, oh, there's a ghost, or oh, it's a jump scare. It's all about the human side of things. The emotions that the people feel, the fear, the grief, all of those things. That's where the real horror comes from, and King writes it masterfully. In Pet Sematary, he made me feel negative emotions that I have never felt just by writing about these characters experiencing them, which is, I don't know how he did it, but he did, and I was in my English class reading it when I shouldn't have been, but it's Stephen King and it's hard to put him down once he gets going. I was reading it in English and I was on the verge of tears. I was like, I can't be doing this. Why are you going to make me cry in class? He's so good at what he does, and so that is the main reason why I loved this book. Although there are a few other reasons, and that is the story itself. Throughout the whole thing, Stephen King builds up this sense of dread by revealing tidbits of information through Judd Crandall, or like kind of ghosts and things like that. They all say things or do things that build up a sense of dread that just accumulates and grows bigger and bigger as the story goes on, as it charges towards the ending that everyone knows is inevitable while reading it, but hopes isn't going to happen. And that's just so well done. And that's why I was reading it in English class. I just couldn't stop. You could feel it going somewhere, and you knew that wherever it was going to be awful. And so it's kind of like when you drive past a car accident, you have to slow down and look. Well, it's kind of inverse because I was speeding up to go and look, but you are being almost made to just plough forward, and the way he did that was just, really, really good. So, that is all I can say that I liked, really, without going into spoilers, because I could talk about individual scenes, individual moments, but can't do that without spoilers. So I'll talk about the non-spoiler things I didn't like, and then we'll go into the spoiler section. So the only thing that I had a real gripe with that's worth mentioning, because I could nitpick, but I don't like doing that. So the only thing that I had a real gripe with was the ending. As I just said, you're reading it and growing closer and closer and closer to this ending. And then when it happens, it's only about 60 pages long at that, and you've read like 300 pages of, or the best part of 200 prior to that. And so it felt a bit like an anticlimax where the thing that you've been knowing was going to happen and yet hoping wouldn't, when it actually happens, it's not as, dramatic or horrifying as I would have hoped it would be. And this has been kind of an issue with me with Stephen King for a while. People read him and go, oh, he's terrifying, but his books haven't really made me feel or get scared in the way that visual media does. Things like films or like a YouTube series that I've looked into called The Mandela Catalogue. That stuck with me. That kept me awake at night. That wasn't okay. But with Stephen King, it's more in the moment when you're reading it, and then it doesn't stay with you. Like, the larger questions stay with you, but the horror aspects don't. And that's not a problem by me, because I like the emotional side. But I was hoping that the supernatural stuff at the end would have a bit more oomph in it than it did. Now, it did make me feel uneasy. Like, when there were noises in the house while I was reading it, I was like, what's that? And didn't want to go and look, because I was like, oh, it's going to be the thing in the book. But that was good, but it just didn't make me feel the unease or fear that I would have hoped. Like with The Shining, in the climactic scenes of that book, I felt nauseous, and like the horror was a physical sensation rather than just kind of a mindset. So it just didn't pack as much punch as The Shining did, as Misery did in the climactic scenes, but because that they were only like 60 pages, you can't really knock the book down too far based on that, because what comes before, the setup leading towards it, is so good by itself that even though where it was leading to was meh, the stuff that came before was so good that it's just like, but do I care that much? So that's my only gripe, and I'll go into more detail in the spoiler section. So, so now we're going into spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled for Pet Sematary, I recommend you read it, although if you're of the faint of heart or easily upset, don't read it. But if you want to look into it, I'd recommend clicking off now. And thanks for watching up until now. Okay, so flipping Andrew Garfield back over and going into the spoilers. So, the spoiler things that I liked, we'll go into scenes now. So let me just specify the details of what goes on here. The thing behind the Pet Sematary that I mentioned, the insidious place, is an Indian burial ground, arguably haunted by it's not a Wendigo, by a Wendigo, which is a mythological beast that is meant to touch you and make you into a cannibal, but it doesn't do that in this book. But arguably the burial ground has been haunted by a Wendigo, and now whatever is buried there comes back to life. First, the Creeds bury their cat, Winston Churchill, there. He comes back. He's kind of off. He's not quite himself. He's not graceful anymore. He kills things a bit more, but he's not outright aggressive. And then later on, when the Creed's youngest member, Gage, is run over by a truck, he's then buried up there, and then he comes back and kills people. And that's the climactic scene I was talking about, and we'll get into that in a minute. But that's what's going on here. That's the story. And I feel like the way Stephen King wrote the Dread, I'll get into that now. The character of Dread Cantal was really good as an expository character. He talks a lot, but it's done in a way that is interesting. It's like, because it's all the mystery, the information is withheld. So when Judd is talking about this stuff to Louis, about what happens when you bury a human up there, what happened when he buried his pet dog up there, you want to know, because you're like, well, this is going to spur the story forward, this is new, I'm interested. So Judd was great for that. I also like Judd because I have a soft spot for the sort of wise old man archetype. The same with Country for Old Men, like the police chief was kind of, the sheriff was kind of a cliche, but I enjoyed it because it's a cliche I like. So that's just me personally. I really like Judd as a character and how he spurred the story onwards. And there was also the character of Victor Pascal, who is hit by a car and dies in Louis' infirmary. Louis is a doctor early in the story, and his ghost appears later, kind of soon after, and warns Louis not to go beyond the deadfall in the Pet Sematary, when behind that is the Indian burial ground. And so all these moving parts make you dread what's behind there. The cat gets buried up there, it comes back, you're like, okay, that's fine. But then you know that's not it. You know that probably a member of the Creed's family is going to be hit by a car or die somehow, and then they're going to be brought back, and you're worried about what that's going to do, and you know that it's not going to be good from the supporting cast. And so that was brilliantly done. And the grief that I felt when Gage is hit, I didn't expect it to impact me as much as it did, because I knew it was going to happen. But King spent a good 50 pages writing the characters mourning. They don't stop mourning even until the end, but there was 50 pages specifically dedicated to the funeral, setting up for the funeral, how the characters react, and it was so upsetting. It genuinely made me hurt. It was brilliantly written, and my favourite scene in the book is at the son's funeral, where his wife's dad, Louis' son, father-in-law, starts insulting Louis, saying that he always knew this sort of thing would happen when his daughter married him, and calling him a murderer of children. And then Louis punches him, and they end up having a scrap in front of his son's coffin, and then Louis kicks his father-in-law into the coffin, and it falls off, and just for a minute the lid comes up, and Louis sees his son's hand and just breaks down. And that was so emotionally charged. I was like, the whole time. It was just so good and full of emotion, so I loved that scene. And that was the highlight of the book for me. But so the emotions that were felt with the events of the story were really, really good. The way most of the characters were fleshed out was great as well. Like Judd had a backstory that was revealed later on, that kind of explained feelings of guilt, why he is the way he is. It was all really well done, considering he was an important side character. But it's like he was very fleshed out for a side character, and I like that. And Louis' wife Rachel, her whole backstory with her sister Zelda, who got spinal meningitis and died horribly over a long course of suffering, and Rachel having to look after her. and the way that impacted Rachel, that was really well written, and I felt really bad for Rachel, and it was, interesting to see, and brutal as well to see how the death of her son brought back the feelings of guilt and her about what happened to her sister when she was a child. So all of that was really good. So that was just a recap of all the character work. But if I were to talk about the things that I liked as well, it was definitely the way Stephen King wrote Louis' deterioration. So like in The Shining, the main character deteriorates towards the end, and this happened with Louis. How he wrote the insanity in Louis, and he's also being influenced by the Wendigo to bury his son in the Indian burial ground, but it's also just him, and so reading how he's a complete mess, and how him and the Wendigo are both kind of rationalizing this horrible thing he's about to do, was so well done and horrifying because it seemed logical. It's like I could see myself doing that in his boots, and that's scary. That's what's scary about this book. It's not the undead toddler at the end. It's the thought, would I do that? And seeing what grief will make a person do. So just that whole sequence, yet again, made me feel nauseous. That was really good. So as I said, while the fear stuff at the end didn't hit right, all the stuff before did. So that was really well done. And I think that's all I can talk about that I liked. So I like the Wendigo. I really like Wendigos and their whole thing. Kind of like in The Witcher, there are things called Leshens, which are similar to Wendigos, I think. At least Wendigos are portrayed differently in different mythologies, but Leshens are very similar to Wendigos, but that's another thing. They're just a cool thing that I like. So right, we'll flip over Andrew Garfield and quickly talk about how the ending didn't hit right in more detail, and then you can be on your merry way. You can leave now if you want. So, as I said, the ending was anticlimactic, and I was really apprehensive throughout the whole book about how this was going to go, because I knew that the titular kind of bad guy, apart from the Wendigo and kind of grief, was going to be an undead 2-year-old, and I just knew that wasn't going to be very scary, and it ended up being a bit more scary than I thought it was going to be, because it wasn't a 2-year-old, it was a possessed 2-year-old, so it was really a demon. So it was scarier than I thought it would be, but not as scary as I wanted it to be. The Wendigo's whole thing was that it would possess what was buried there, and it would, at least when it was a human, it would look at someone and tell them their flaws, or tell them the bad things about them, and that happens in Judd's death scene. Unfortunately, Judd dies, and that was quite sad, but the Wendigo in the body of Gage tells Judd that basically his wife slept with all of his friends, and that must have been a real kick in the balls, because Judd had a lot of guilt about seeing prostitutes and things like that. He felt like he had been disloyal to his wife, and he felt bad about it, and then the Wendigo in his final moments was like,
well, guess what, your wife did it too, she just didn't tell you, and they all laughed at you behind your back.
And that was so sad. And then he gets stabbed by the 2-year-old who has a scalpel. So that scene was like the most frightening and heart-wrenching scene of the final act. And then he kills Rachel, and then Louis euthanizes him. He gives him a lethal injection, and then he buries Rachel. And then the story ends with Rachel coming back and going into the Creed household, and then it just ends. So it's like, as I said, it was kind of anticlimactic. Not very much happened. Like, 2 major characters died, but it was done in the space of like 10 pages. There was no time to grieve like there was with Gage. There was no real impact. And just how the ending was so sudden. Like, I like that it was left to the reader's imagination what happened next, but it just kind of felt unsatisfying considering how much time I put into getting there. I just wanted more oomph. There was some good stuff at the end as well. So his daughter Ellie, this is Louis' daughter Ellie, kind of develops The Shining. At some point she starts having premonitions and dreams and kind of has psychic moments, and that was cool because all Stephen King's books happen in the same universe, so that was a cool callback, even though it was never said, the girl has The Shining. I was like, the girl has The Shining, which was cool. And I really liked that, and just sort of the panic as Rachel, who is currently at her parents, because Louis was like, go, you need time to stay away from the house because our son died here and you need time to heal, whereas he's really saying that so he can go and dig his son up and bury him somewhere else. But Rachel's franticness, seeing Ellie's distress, hearing what Ellie's saying things she shouldn't know, and then Rachel getting more and more worried about Louis and her race to get back only to die. That was quite brutal. But yet again, it kind of felt like, was that where this is where her character arc ends? And she died off page, whereas Judd died on page, kind of. It was a bit like, oh, I feel like the character wasn't done justice with how they died. But yet again, all the ways I can fault it are in the final 60 pages, and the rest of it is nothing but high praise. So I don't want to dwell on that anymore because I don't want to give you the wrong impression. This was a good book. I would have given it 5 stars if it wasn't for the ending. Now it's a 4-star read for me. And maybe it left a slight foul aftertaste in my mouth, but I still really respect what Stephen King did here. Like, as I said, the things that he makes the reader feel, the way he so tangibly writes insanity and the worst things that humans can do is really good. So, read Pet Sematary if that sounds interesting to you. Now, you've watched the spoiler section now, so you won't enjoy the whole thing, although I've not detailed every scene, and I knew everything that was going to happen going in, but I still really enjoyed reading it. So, give it a shot if that sounds like your cup of tea. Thanks for watching, and I will get you a video next Sunday, definitely. If there's anything you want me to talk about in particular, please leave it in the comments. I've read a few Discworld books in the time I haven't done videos. I could talk about The Sandman, which I also watched during my time off. So, if there's anything you want me to talk about at all, I'll be happy to do it. Otherwise, I'll think something else up in the time. I mean, I'm about to finish another Terry Pratchett book. So, we'll see where we go. But, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye.